My name is Meir Valensky. This is Driving Markets. Today we're going to be talking about the Middle East conflict, and it doesn't go back to October the 7th. It goes back 50, 60, 100 years. This Middle East conflict is significant and has a major impact overall on financial markets, whether it's oil, whether it's gold, whether it's the dollar, whether it's movement of goods. So overall, what I'm going to do in this session is give you a little bit of objective, informed knowledge regarding the source of it, the cause of it, what happened, where we're at, and where we go forward. Remember, with Driving Markets, we do offer, obviously, mentorship, coaching, workshops, one-to-ones. We've got covering all areas, whether it's FX or cryptos or options or stocks or shares or bonds, or generally business. So you can also follow me, besides on YouTube, you can subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram and obviously on channel Twitter, which is now called X. What else do we have? Got books on Amazon. So there's a whole array of things. So let's kick off. So what is the source and what is the problem with the Middle East? It all depends which timeline you want to take. If we can take the timeline from 1948, establishment of Israel via UN resolution in November 1947, that's one timeline, but we probably could go back a lot further. So as far as Israel is concerned, or Palestine, which is a common terminology used amongst the world in order to probably remove Israel from the map and replace it with Palestine, Israel was originally Judea. It was Israel because when the Jewish tribes, or when the tribes left Egypt, they went and conquered the land of Canaan. Israel was biblically given by God to the Jews. So it depends where you want to start this particular movie. Do you want to start from the time of God immemorial, give the time to the movies, or do you want to start from 1900s or from 1940s? There's a whole load of timelines. I'm going to go back a little bit further to the time of the Romans, when the Jews were living in Israel, which was then called Israel, Judea, because the Jews came from a place called Judea and Samaria and Israel. Israel was one of the names given to Jacob, and Jacob was the son of Isaac, and Isaac was the son of Abraham. So there's a whole genealogy going back there, and I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible and keep you up to speed so you don't get completely lost. So the Romans conquered Israel at the time, and they wanted to wipe out the Jews. So they enslaved them and they exiled the Jews, destroying obviously the Jewish temple at the time. And what they wanted to do is change the name of Israel to wipe out the nation and change it to Palestina. So they changed the name to Palestina, and effectively there were two names running throughout the generations. There was Palestine, and there was, which were accepted by the Western world, and then the Jews always referred to it as Israel, with their yearning to return back to their homeland and the rebuilding of their temples. That's the historical where the Jews come from. Throughout the centuries, the Jews have been exiled from Israel to Babylonia, to Iran, Persia, obviously to Europe, etc. And there was a movement of population throughout the time. Now, essentially what happened is that those Jews then adapted or adopted the local cultures and the local language of those said countries, whether it's England, Poland, Germany, Slovakia, Russia, France, Holland, etc. So you had the Jews that were acclimatized North African Jews and the Jews that were European Jews. Within the Jewish script, there is always a desire to return to Israel and Jerusalem. Throughout the centuries, their prayer books and all of their Torah and their learning comes from the fact that they have a yearning to go back to Israel. So that is the side of the Jews. And the side of the non-Jews, the side of how they see the world, etc. So they saw the land as conquered. So as the land was conquered, it moved from authority to authority. Byzantine, it went to the Ottoman Empire, which is the Turkish Empire, and they controlled Israel, the Middle East, essentially, or Palestine, the Middle East, for about 400, 500, 600 years. Now, the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire, and the Jews, obviously, that were in Israel or Palestine at the time were considered second-rate citizens, because if you're not a Muslim, then you are considered a dhimmi, which is a lower level of category of individual. That's nothing Islamophobic, or nothing. It's just a fact that that's how Islam refers to a person who is not a Muslim. And that's fine. That's how they want to run the religion. That's fine. Acceptable, not acceptable. That's an opinion, and that's totally up to you how you want to interpret that. But as far as the Ottoman Empire was concerned, so they controlled the area of Palestine. There's no Palestinian people as such. It was just inhabitants of the Ottoman Empire, and there were a lot of Arabs and nomads and Bedouins, etc. That's all was fine up until the First World War, when Turkey was an ally to Germany, and Turkey went to war with the British Empire. So the British Empire then, in 1914-15, they pushed away the Turks out of Palestine. They took over. That part became part of the British Empire. So Palestine then became part of the British Empire. There was always already a movement. If we go back a little bit, there was a movement set up in Germany and in Russia by the Jews then, which were mainly secular Jews, that wanted to set up a return to Zion. And this is the real central point of probably the conflict globally. The word Zion means Jerusalem, return to Zion. So you'll find that within the Jewish prayer books, the word Zion is mentioned many, many times. It doesn't mean something bad, it doesn't mean something apartheid, it doesn't mean something that you're going to murder or kill or genocide, whatever the case may be. It's just a terminology for return to Jerusalem. Another word for Jerusalem is Zion. So the Zionist movement, which started in Europe and in Russia, was there to culture a movement to return to Zion, to return to Israel, to return to Jerusalem. Therefore, they became Zionists. Zionist means you want to return to Jerusalem, return to Israel. They set that up mainly because, if you know your European history and Eastern European history, the Jews were moved around. There was a lot of pogroms, a lot of killing, a lot of rampaging. So therefore, the Jews wanted their own homeland. So the Zionist movement was established to re-establish the homeland within Israel, or, for those viewers who are not happy with the word Israel, Palestine, whichever the view you want to take. So that chunk of land in the Middle East is called Palestine or Israel. So the Zionist movement was set up in order to relocate, it was in order to re-establish, to regrow Israel at the time. Now, at the time, Palestine was sparsely inhabited. There were few villages. There was a lot of nomads and Bedouins, a lot of Arabs moving through. In fact, if you read Mark Twain's book on description of Israel, he said it was a barren desert land with no growth. So the Zionists came along, or the people who wanted to return to Israel in the 1890s, 1900s, and they began to build communal towns, communal villages called kibbutzim. Kibbutz is a communal village where it's a bit based on the communist basis, the Marxist basis, where everyone's equal, and they began to plant and cultivate and one thing and another. The minute there was trade and cultivation, that attracted populations to come in. So you got the nomads and the Bedouins coming in, and they settled in then Palestine. But they weren't originally Palestinians. What they were was Arabs, Bedouin Arabs. Again, this is objective, this is fact. It's not something that's slanted or narrative, and being as objective as possible for you to get as much knowledge as possible on the Middle East. So if you think it's a slant, it's not. It's just giving you hard facts. There was a drawing in of the population from the surrounding areas. And now you have to remember, at the time, the biggest colonial powers at the time were Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, etc. And what they did is they began to demarcate and they began to separate the Middle East into countries. At one time, the Syria, Iraq, there weren't really any borders. Saudi Arabia, there weren't any borders. Kuwait, there weren't any borders. Jordan, there weren't any borders. And if you look at the borders, they're all very straight lines. Why is that? It's because what they did, the colonial powers, they simply took a ruler across all of the Middle East and they drew a straight line and made the countries directly straight. Normally borders are jagged or there might be some movement. As far as the Europeans are concerned, they came along and said, no, let's just make that Jordan, let's make that Saudi Arabia, let's make that Syria. Those are the borders of Iraq, and that's Lebanon. So that's why you've got, if you look at the map, you'll see straight lines, and that's because those lines were simply drawn by a ruler. That's the way it is, a ruler, not a ruler king, a ruler in terms of a straight line, boom, with a pen. Now, if you look at the the Palestine area. The Palestine area was actually huge up by 1917. By 1917, the Palestine area included Jordan. Jordan was not around. There was no such thing as Jordan in 1917. So when Lord Balfour he was foreign secretary, he made the declaration of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, saying that the Jews should have a homeland with the Arabs in Palestine. He meant the whole area, including what is today Jordan. Now, in 1922, the British went and demarcated Jordan. They split Palestine in 75%, 25%, and they made Transjordan the majority of Palestine. That became absolutely accepted by the Arabs. And then they made the other part Palestine. So that disputed territory in Western eyes is a dispute between Arabs and Jews. Now that disputed territory became more and more populated as Jews began to flee Europe back in 1930s and early 30s, late 30s and 1940s. There was a mass emigration to Palestine by the Jews to be saved from Europe. So this is where one of the disputes is, where the Arabs say, well, all these European Jews came over to Israel, and as a result of that, they became displaced. Not really, it's not exactly true. What happens is they came over and they began to build towns, but the Arabs also had towns. There wasn't such an issue. What's the problem of having an Arab town and a Jewish town? But it was really getting to very, very heated area. And after the Second World War, where the Europeans, to a degree, said, you know what, we feel guilty of what we've done, slaughtering 6 million Jews plus 5 million non-Jews, and millions were killed. They decided in November 1947 to set up a partition of Israel, partition of Palestine. So they split it up between Arab part and Jewish part. The Arabs rejected the 1947 UN partition. So again, depends on what timeline you're taking. Are you taking the biblical timeline, which could be, they have a right to reside in Israel because they are Jews, or you could take the historical United Nations timeline, which is, no, we're only going to start the clock from this particular point. So 1947, if you're starting the clock from there, there was a partition. The United Nations agreed to split Palestine, and the British gave up their mandates. The British were in control of Palestine between 1917 and 1948. And the British said, you know, we're handing it back to the League of Nations, the United Nations. We can't cope with this. There's too much conflict going on, too much battles going on. Remember, up until then, they weren't living in peace. It wasn't so that Arabs and Jews were living in peace. Before 1948, there were already many terror attacks, Arab terror attacks on Jewish villages. And there were also Jews that responded. So any viewer that says, this is not balanced, there was quid pro quo. They were both responding to each other, to be absolutely clear. Again, want to stay objective, that you don't start getting the wrong view. So the Arabs massacred the Jews, for example, in Hebron in 1929. They massacred men, women, and children. There was massacre in Akko. There's massacre in Sfat. So the Arabs went on the rampage because the Hajj in Jerusalem, or the Husseini, I can't remember the exact name, the Husseini, the leader of the Arabs in Jerusalem, would rile up the Arabs to say that the Jews are taking over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they weren't taking over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but that was his way of getting all the Arabs riled up, and they all got riled up, and they went on the rampage, and they killed hundreds and hundreds of Jews back in 1929. So there were lots of instances of conflict. The Arabs were not tolerant of the Jews in Israel. They looked constantly for a way to displace the Jews because they were an irritant to the Arabs. Come 1947, the Arabs rejected it. 5th of May 1948, Israel declared independence of the partition. So there's partly Arabs and part Israel. And what did they do? They went to war. So the Arab armies then went and invaded Israel. So you've got Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, all attacked Israel. And this all war went on for 1 year. And Israel won and expanded its area. The Jordanians stayed in the area of the West Bank. That was Jordanian control from 1948 through to 1967. The reason why it's called the West Bank, because it's the West Bank of the River Jordan. That's why it's called the West Bank of the River Jordan. So you've got the whole of Jordan, and they controlled the West Bank. The West Bank had no Jews in it. No Jews were allowed in the West Bank. There was a state of war. and they controlled also the most holiest site as far as Jerusalem is concerned. The Jews are concerned, which is the Western Wall and the site of the temple. No Jews were allowed there. Now that area was all controlled under Jordan. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, was established. But please note, make a note here, that they established it for the establishment of a state of Palestine. But the West Bank, which is what they claim today that they want to have a Palestinian state, is essentially the West Bank was under their control of the Arabs, but they never established a Palestinian state. So the question was, why was the PLO established? Why was the Palestinian Liberation Organization established? To free Palestine if the Jordan West Bank was under control of the Jordanians and Gaza was under control of the Egyptians. What was their beef? What was the conflict? Why were they so upset at the time? Why did they want to go to war? Why did they want to free when they already had control of that land? So it begs the question, do they really want the West Bank or Gaza, or do they want the whole of Israel? If we move on to 1967, there was the Six-Day War between Jordan, Syria, Egypt, also Iraqi forces were sent over, and Lebanon, and the whole area went into war. In the 6 days, Israel won again and expanded its territory, covering the West Bank. They took over the Gaza from Egypt, they took over the Sinai, and they took over the Golan Heights. So now Israel's area has expanded again due to war forced on them, not by them voluntarily go and committing war. So we've got to be really factual here as to what the situation is. Israel now finds itself in control over 1 million Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza, and it goes under a military governorship under the West Bank and under Gaza, and that's the situation as of today. In the 1960s, there were other wars also, but in the 1960s, a person called Ahmad Yassin established the Hamas movement, and Israel thought at the time that Hamas was some sort of charity organization, social welfare, healthcare, etc. So they let it run, and they breeded Hamas. Why did they allow Hamas to run? Because Hamas is an Islamic organization on the basis funded by Muslim Brotherhood, part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and therefore Hamas came a Islamic fundamentalist organization against the PLO, which was a modern, secular, Free Palestine type of organization, terrorist organization. PLO was terrorist organization, just to be absolutely clear. So the PLO, headed by Yasser Arafat, who died many, many years ago, they went on a terrorist campaign, and at one stage they were actually nearly going to take over Jordan, and that's what caused the Black September riots of 1971. And the King Hussein of Jordan, what he did is he fought against the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine. And what they did, he kicked them out of Jordan. They went to Lebanon. So the PLO, which was the leader of the Palestinian terror against Israel over the 20, 30, 40 years, they went and hijacked planes, hijacked ships, killed people, shot, bombed, etc., in order to get awareness, in order just to kill and maim as much as possible. Simple put, a terror organization. Can't find any of the words for it. Meanwhile, Hamas is growing. In 1987, Yassin, who established the official Hamas, has now got really, really powerful, and then started the first Intifada in Israel. Intifada mainly means war, killing, rape, murder, attacking, blowing up, suicide bombings, etc. So they started a suicide bombing attack of blowing themselves up on buses, on restaurants, on coffee shops, in the streets, on the trains, etc. in Israel. Israel never come across this phenomena before of suicide bombers. This was a new thing. They had it in Lebanon, but they hadn't had it in Israel as such, and they didn't know how to cope with it. So Hamas now has introduced a new type of terror, which is called suicide bombing. This continued. Remember, Israel had partly funded Hamas because they saw that as the contra to the PLO. They didn't like Yasser Arafat, didn't want to do peace with Yasser Arafat, but Yasser Arafat signed a peace agreement in 1990, 1991, and from then moved on with Bill Clinton involved on the lawn of Washington, the White House, etc. But instead of Yasser Arafat accepting peace, he went on a second intifada. Off he goes again, more blowing up, more killing, more murder, more restaurants blowing up, more suicide bombers. That was the PLO and Hamas. And Hamas did not like the PLO's approach. So Hamas went on to become the leader in terror and to come indoctrinate their children from school how to become terrorists and to hate Jews, etc. And that's what you've got essentially today. You've got a culture war between, it's not really a fight over land. If it was a fight over land, it would have been solved back in 1947 or 1991 or in the year 2000 or in 2008 when Ehud Olmert gave away 98% of the West Bank. It's not a land, it's to do with culture. It's to do with the fact that probably the Jews are not really wanted in the Middle East. It's very much a Middle East mentality that they're foreigners, get them out, colonialists, whatever the case may be. It's not really a land issue, it's a culture issue, it's a conflict of culture. And that's really probably what the issue is today. Again, being as objective possible. Some people may not agree with me. I get it. I get that. I understand. But everyone has to have the facts on the table as to what were the facts. Not what were the facts or look what Israel's done or Hamas has done or the PLO's. Look at the facts. What are the facts on the ground? So they're fighting over a bit. They say they're fighting over a bit of real estate. But I believe that's probably a bit more than that. Again, we'll try and keep this objective as possible. Fast forward now, as Israel left Gaza in 2005, no one's in Gaza. Now, there is a common mistake made that Gaza is controlled by Israel. It's not. Israel has borders with Gaza, but Egypt also has borders with Gaza, and Egypt is a Muslim country. But Egypt's blocked off its border with Gaza and does not want the Gazans, Palestinian Gazans, moving over to Egypt. The question is, why is that? I've got several answers, but I don't want to bore you to tears. They don't want anything to do. In fact, when Egypt went into peace with Israel in 1978, they refused to take Gaza in 1978. So obviously Gaza is a problem that no one seems to want it. And that is fact, not fiction. No one seems to want Gaza, not Israel, not the Egyptians, not the Jordanians, not Saudi Arabians. No one wants Gaza. They want to cut it off completely. In fact, no one's even taken in refugees from Gaza, which is also an interesting point. So what they do is they want to pass the responsibility, the ownership over to someone else. So Israel left Gaza in 2005, uprooted hundreds of families and left Gaza. So now there's no Jews, no Israelis in Gaza. What happened was Hamas came along, they killed all of the PLO, the Palestinian Authority representatives and the soldiers or the policemen, threw them off buildings, etc. And then Hamas took over. Okay? Hamas now controls, there was an election, by the way, and Hamas was voted in, and Hamas now controlled Gaza for the last 18 years, generating a real hotbed of terror, constantly firing rockets at Israel, which is in itself a major transgression. And on top of that, terror attacks and kidnappings. They are an extreme terror organization looking to change the whole region. So they are Muslim Brotherhood. They're not there for peace. They're not there to sing Kumbaya, my Lord, on the beach. They are a terror organization. Fact. You may not like it. You may call them freedom fighters. There's a big difference between freedom fighters and terrorists. So, for example, people say to me that Nelson Mandela was a freedom fighter in the eyes of South Africa, was a terrorist. Nelson Mandela did not send his people to blow themselves up in the middle of restaurants and on buses. They might have demonstrated, they might have rioted, but they didn't go out on absolute terror like Hamas did, or Islamic Jihad, or the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, to name but a few. That accelerates. So Gaza was changed into a terror hub by Hamas, with a load of imports coming in from the tunnels underneath the Egyptian border, and they were just smuggling in there. And the heads of Hamas, one of them, Ismail Haniyeh, became a multi-billionaire, and they formulated and set up a state of their own, bases to attack Israel. We all know what happened after October the 7th, but this is ongoing struggle. It's not going to stop. So we can say whether called a genocide, whatever your definition of genocide is, you can call Israel's the aggressor, Israel's the oppressor, Israel's done this. Israel has been at war with its neighbors for years. So this is not new. What Israel doesn't do, for the sake of the audience, it doesn't rape and murder and pillage. I know that's the narrative that lots of people want to put out there, but it's not. That's fact. They don't do that. They are compliant Western independent judiciary system that is answerable. So they don't do those things. They're not trained to go out and rape and pillage as compared to Hamas, which are. So Hamas is a terror organization that needs to be removed from the whole arena and the world, full stop. That's fact. You might not like it, but that's the way it goes. So that is a bit of history over the conflict. At the moment, the conflict is continuing. This is going to escalate even further, obviously with the neighbors, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Iran being the main engine behind it because of the Islamic Revolution from 1979 with Ayatollah Khamenei looking for an Islamic global power. So Iran wants to get control of the region, and Israel is a thorn in the backside. If they can get rid of Israel, then the whole region becomes under Iranian control, and then they can just keep on spreading that to whatever they want to do accordingly. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been as objective as possible. No doubt some people are going to get upset because it's an emotional issue and everyone gets animated. The idea is to give you the information based on fact. How you interpret those facts, then you formulate your own opinion. You can follow me on this channel on YouTube, or you can follow me on Instagram. You can subscribe, share, comment. I always invite feedback. I don't negate anyone. Dialogue is a great way to understand the other side's point of view, and I encourage it. That's it for now. If you have any questions, you can always contact me. I'll be willing to help. Catch you later.